Hey, this is Ben at Harrison. Today I'm going to demonstrate one of the cool new features we're adding in Mixbus version 3.4. This feature is called Polarity Maximization, and it's a way to take your multi-microphone recordings and automatically determine the best polarity setting for each of the tracks, which settings will give you the loudest, highest RMS output, and essentially the best sound from those tracks without having to individually toggle the polarity switches of every track. This was contributed to us by Jim Davis at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Ohio State University. So I'm going to quickly demonstrate how to use this new polarity optimization feature. It's very similar to initiating an export or a loudness report. I'm just going to grab a range of tracks. Notice that I've got my kick track, snare top and bottom, some rack toms, each of which is getting hit once. I've got a hi-hat track, 2 overheads, and a mono room microphone. And it's important to grab a period of time that represents all of the instruments played or being struck. Now this could be a multi-mic, like spot mics on a symphony, and some room microphones. It could be any situation where you have multiple microphones recording the same source, and it's important to find the toggle switch positions that give you the best sound. Now what does best sound mean? Well, we don't want to destroy our imaging, which might happen if we use time-stretching tools or sliding things back and forward. But what we can all agree on sounds better is if a sound is slightly louder on the average level. So this algorithm optimizes for the maximum RMS value. And as simple as that sounds, an RMS value actually encompasses a lot of subtle psychoacoustic cues, such as the punch, the correlation gives you more punch and authority in the low end. And of course, the louder signal our ears are always going to like better. So although it may sound like something that's more mechanical and not as aesthetically pleasing, the research has shown that by maximizing the RMS, it's the best way for this algorithm to immediately give you a great starting point for your drums without you having to go and individually toggle all the thousands and thousands of combinations that it would take to try every track with the polarity flipped in combination with each of the other tracks either flipped or not flipped. So this is a way to really jumpstart your mix if you've got multi-mic'd instruments. So to demonstrate this, I'm just going to right-click in my range and choose Optimize Polarity. And we have a couple of options. There's a high-pass filter that is applied only to the signal as it's being processed. This doesn't actually apply to your tracks. It's just applied while the polarity optimizer is running. And there's also a low shelf boost, which emphasizes the low end, and in some cases that can give you an even more obvious low end boost when the tracks are summed together with the correct polarity. And then there's a normalize option, and you might use the normalize option if some of your tracks are unusually quiet or loud, and it's throwing off the polarity optimization because those tracks are being over or underrepresented. In our case, these are the loudnesses of the tracks that will probably end up close to being their mixed level, so we're going to leave that normalize turned off. And you can learn more about that by clicking the description button here. So I'll run the optimization. It just takes a second. And you see that we now have our results. At the top of the dialog, we see a button that allows us to listen to the new or switch back to the old settings. So I can click on my track and roll through the sound either with the old polarity settings or with the new polarity settings. And then we have a list of our tracks, and it tells us which tracks were flipped with polarity. So we notice that the snare bottom has been flipped, which we would expect because the snare top and the snare bottom probably have microphones pointing in opposite directions, and I would expect that those would need to be flipped. But we also received an unexpected result that the mono room microphone should be flipped. The Polarity Optimizer uses your channel's polarity switches right in the mixer strip. So when I switch to the new polarity, you see that I've enabled the polarity switches in my mixer. So I can use that to manually adjust the settings that it's chosen, and I can also audition back and forth between the old and the new. For this second example, I've got some drum tracks that were recorded by students, and there's a lot of bleed in between all the microphones. And we're going to find that using the Polarity Maximizer, we can get almost 2.5 dB of gain just by switching a couple of the polarity switches. And it's pretty unintuitive and unexpected which tracks they end up being. It would take you forever to come up with this solution by switching them manually. So what I'm going to do is click and drag across all of my drum tracks, and I'm making sure to include this tom hit so that everybody is represented. and then I right click and choose, well, first let's look at the current loudness. So I'm going to export this range through the master bus just to get a quick measurement. So we're currently reading minus 24.9 LUFS. Now I'm going to optimize the polarity just using the default settings. You'll notice that it has switched the polarity on both kick drum microphones, and it switched the polarity on the top snare drum. So the snare drum is not too unexpected. We would expect the snare bottom and top to be reversed. But reversing the kick drum with respect to all the rest of the kit is something that we might not have anticipated. And now let's see what we got. If I export the range, we're now reading minus 22.6 LUFS. That's about 2.5 dB increase, and that is really something that's worth getting just by switching the polarity on a couple of tracks. You would never find that result experimentally switching one track at a time. So by using this Polarity Maximizer tool, we've been able to give ourselves a 2.5 dB extra punch out of our drums just by switching a couple of tracks. That's not something that you could get by randomly turning tracks on and off or trying to use your intuition. This is a mathematically sound way of determining exactly how to get the very best polarity switch for every one of your tracks.